All right, let's have a look at the trend that I think we have seen from the AASL exam papers. So since 2021, to be honest, to me, I think the exam has been gradually getting more difficult, especially with the striking similarity between the SL and HA papers, as well as it's quite demanding problems from the topic 4 on each year. So today I'd like to take the chance to show you similar questions from recent years, starting from 2023 and going backwards, and show you why I think it's quite difficult for the ESL students, and hence they have to prepare very well, as well as the main focus should be on the topic 4. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, in ancient history, there's a term called the doppelgänger, and it's a term to be used that there's an exact replica of me as an individual living opposite side of the world. And once they meet each other, I think one of them dies, and that's how we describe. And I think the continued trend that I've seen from the HL essay papers from the AA students is that it's very similar. So first, let's have a look at some of the questions from 2023 and how similar they are. All right, I'm not trying to show you how difficult the papers are from between these two. But on the left hand side we got the HL, and on the right hand side we got the SL. I just want you to see that how striking similarity you see between them. Okay, and I do believe, therefore, you don't learn um, less details in terms of the difference between the HL and SL, but it's about how much more topics you cover in HL. If, for example, you study arithmetic sequence between the HL and SL students, the same gravity must be learned during the lesson, right? You don't learn less of the arithmetic sequence if you take the AASL when you study the arithmetic sequence compared to the HL students. Okay, so since the radian measure is a core topic, and it's fair to ask both of them, and this was question number 1. Let's move on to the question number 2. Right, and the next question, question number 2 from the HL and the question number 3 from the SL represent the rational function. And as you know, when we see the rational function, what we want to do is to be able to graph it, indicating the horizontal asymptote as well as the vertical asymptote. And for this one, yeah, it's usually that you don't see the division form of the rational forms, but now you see the quotient 1 is going to be the horizontal asymptote, and the SL students were equally supposed to know, as well as the HL students, right? So as you can see, they're exactly the same, and I'm just trying to point out the fact that the AA students, SL students by no means should study less when they actually study the same concept as the HL students. Similar level of the practice. And as you can see, and you might actually be able to compare between the HL and SL books. If it's a core topic such as function or radian measure from the previous questions, you see almost all the practice questions are very similar. Okay, so you should aim for more advanced questions when you practice during the process. All right, another lovely question from the probability. So the probability questions, you encounter 2 types of questions. One that you have to actually think in terms of how the wordy questions can be translated into different countings. So for example, you can use 3 types of diagram, typically, Venn diagram, tree diagram, and lattice diagram. And another type of question is the one that you're able to convert those probability notations to solve them simultaneously, such as the conditional probability, intersection, or union. Okay, so this question actually puts the student to practice more in terms of the simultaneous equation. And they see the conditional probability, they want to convert. When they see the union, they want to convert. Okay, and that's how we actually practice those problems. And as you can see, left hand side HL, right hand side SL, exactly the same from 2023. All right, we see the same question here on the question number 4 from the HL and the question number 5 from the SL. As you can see, we had to find the shaded area. It's exactly the same question. And then what we had to do was to find the integral. And if you actually look at the question yourself, what do we have to do to find the area? It's a positive region here, so I don't have to worry about the signed area. It's just going to be integration from 0 to c. And as you know, it's going to be the substitution from the denominator and then find the antiderivative of the rational function. But as you can see, it's exactly the same, right? Just to point out that it's a doppelganger. It is a doppelganger between the HL and SL students to practice for the exam. Yes, just to point out again from between the from the HL question number 5 and then SL question number 6 is the function composition. And if you want to see them equality, what you have to do is to perform the composition and then try to compare their coefficient, right? And so this function composition was also asked during the lesson, during the practice questions, during the exam questions, and as well students were equally had to do just like the HL students, right? So I'm just trying to point out that you cannot go easy on the practice as an SL student. All right, let's have a look at this question number 10 from the HL and the question number 9 from the SL. As you can see, this was a challenging optimization problem, and even SL students also had to find a modeling, right? When you see the area equation, what we had to do was to when you see the modeling problem, you always have to find whose maximum minimum you are looking for. We're looking for the area's maximum. So now, conditionally, I have to have the expression for the area in terms of x. So as you can see, you have to do a little modeling here, trying to see which one I'm going to call it h and then base, and then try to use the triangular area formula. Not only that, you have to differentiate. I think it was a quite challenging problem for the SL students, especially for the question part C, because when you start working with the differentiation, what you tend to do is just perform the differentiation. So for this one, you have to use the product and chain rule. But what often students do not do is they do not factorize it, right? But factorization on the derivative is very important because later on it can be used for the stationary point and for the second derivative test, right? So it is very important for you, after having differentiated, to work with the algebra, such as the factorization, and it shouldn't be skipped. But my point here is the emphasis on algebra is equally put on the SL students as well. So it's very important that you also practice with that level of dedication, especially with the algebra. Do not just differentiate and leave it there. Try to factorize with the common factor. But I'm saying that, equally difficult as the HL students for the SL students. All right, the trend and similarity, it doesn't go anywhere with paper 2 either. If you look at the paper 2 here, the question number 1 on the left hand side is HL, and then the right hand side is the SL. As you can see, it's something with the linear regression, and it's expected to know the use of a calculator and then use it for the to know the difference between the interpolation and extrapolation. It's exactly the same, hence we call it doppelgänger. Only the marks, I think, are different. Right, question number 2, both of them covers the trigonometry between the H and SL. And as you can see for this one, if you look at the SSS, you got to use the cosine rule. The question do not tell you the cosine rule. You have to realize it. And then also, having figured out the angle, you can also use the right angle triangle for the SOHCAHTOA. When you have a hypotenuse, the adjacent is covered with the cosine and the opposite is covered with the sine, right? So for the H, we have to use the sine and things like that. As you can see between the H and SL, no difference if it's a core module. Practice harder as an SL student to prepare for the exam. Okay, it's the trend, the doppelganger. You're going to see the exact same question from the HL student. So you should you should practice and prepare stronger than before. Yeah, another exactly the same question here, which talks about the normal distribution, the superstar from the topic 4, right? And for part A, we got the mu and sigma, so you can get the CDF no problem. And then according to the 80% of the back, so sure, then we have to use the the standardization and then use the inverse normal to find it, right? And the part D, I think it's a really, really good question. I want you to pause this video. If you actually had studied the topic 4 and prepared for the exam or school test, pause the video and think about part D. What do we have to do? We up to C, we're talking about the weight, which is a continuous random variable. But if you go to the part D, now we're choosing the tan backs of the rise. Okay, then now it becomes discrete random variable. And we don't choose any back. We actually have a condition. We have the fixed probability of working with the choosing the back. It's whenever it weights less than a doppelganger, which we're supposed to find from the part C. And in the answer for the part D is actually, it is something to do with the binomial distribution. So here, just like for the HL student, you had to realize by reading the question on part D that even though the question didn't tell you that, you realize that it's something to do with the binomial distribution and use the probability of success from the normal distribution from the previous part, you see? And that sort of a deduction is also asked on SL students. So this gradual trend to demand more on the SL students is ongoing. So you should prepare more, my friend. Oh my God, the list goes on and on, isn't it? So now this is the binomial expansion. that compares with the coefficient, and what you had to do was to use the geometric mean. And as you can see, the question number 4 from the HL paper, and then the question number 5 from the SI paper, exactly identical, right? This is why we call it doppelganger, right? So let's have a look at the next question. Yeah, here, it's a use of calculator. You got the velocity, and here they ask you to use the calculator to find the derivative, right? To represent, for example, the acceleration, and then at rest, then you have to translate the velocity is equal to 0 for the distance. What you want to do is to find the area under the velocity. So as you can see, exactly the same thing between the HL and SL from the 2023 May. Yeah, question number 10 and 8, H and SL respectively, talks about the periodic behavior, right, with the spring, which is from the Hooke's law, right? So it's periodic behavior, and where you have to represent what the A and B stands for the amplitude and then the principal axis. But I'm just trying to point out that it's exactly the same. It goes on, talking about finding the coefficient, etc. Almost the identical exam questions. So what I'm telling you here to do is to prepare well as an SL student, to not, take it easy for the core topics. You need to have a similar ground as the HL student does. And the next problem is from 2022, I think it's November. Paper 1, question 1 goes with the integration by substitution, but it goes definite integration by substitution. But as you can see, left hand side is the HL, the right hand side is the SL. It gives more hint, but more or less it's exactly the same. Again, the next problem from the 2022 November paper 1, it talks about the descriptive stats with the whisker plot, and how do you find the the upper bound and lower bound of the what do we call it, the outlier, right? That's the third quartile plus the 1/2 of the interquartile range, and then vice versa. And then what you had to do is to find them and use it formulas. It's not in the booklet. If both HL and SS students are expected to know, and we had to use it, as you can see. And the question number 3 and 4, talking about the trigonometric equations here, what you had to do is to use, for example, the double angle. And then I think what you had to do is also work with the yeah, I think it's mostly the double angle, and then use the substitution, right? And question number 4 and 5, and here working with the differentiation. As you know, it's got the gradient tangent being similar, it's in parallel to the tangent line there. So what you have to do is to find the derivative, put x equal to 1, and then make it equal to 5 times e to the power of k, and so for the equation. But as you can see, left hand side HL, right hand side SL, exactly the same. We call it doppelganger. And number 5 and 6 again. So trigonometric equation here. Okay, this is actually a very lovely problem because it's talking about the function transformation, doesn't it? And then yeah, you just had to realize about the translation first, and then the dilation and the range, and then the translation again, right? And for part B, solving inequality, you actually have to have a sufficient understanding of what the trigonometric function. Since it's a periodic function, you can have multiple intersection, and you have to describe it well. Both HL and SL students, it's almost the same. Number 10 and 8, as you can see, it's almost the same. I think the last part of the question that we're missing here from the section A, but it's exactly the same, right? And for this one, yes, the logarithmic function is often used for the arithmetic or the geometric sequence because of its property from converting from addition to the multiplication. But doppelganger, as I wanted to point it out, and the list goes on and on. But if you ask me, okay, then what's for HL then, right? And yeah, I mean, obviously there are some big difference, right? The harder question in section B, for example, can be one thing, and obviously a broader range of the questions. And then paper 3 obviously is the killer, right? It's nowadays that's the one that focuses a lot for the school test as well as the exam. So if you're a student from the HL, what you should to know pretty much everything on the paper 1 and paper 2 at ease, but on the section B or paper 3 problems, those are the ones that you're gonna find most challenging. Okay, and for SL students, I just want to point out 2 things. So if it's a core module, just like the Radian measure, Binomial Expansion, things like that, what we have seen from topic 1 to 5, you should really put the same level of effort as the HL students do, because as you can see, it's very, very similar. That's number 1. And number 2, what is most demanding for the SL students from now on with the recent exam papers are actually topic 4. I think it's been very hard. If you ask this SL specific questions to the HL students, they would actually find it very difficult to answer as well. So it's been actually for the past 3 years that the topic 4 has been very demanding, and this is the word of advice that you should actually prepare them. So let me quickly point out why I think topic 4 has been quite difficult. in terms of what I've felt from the questions, and we can continue to talk about more. But yes, word of advice for the SS students: please prepare harder. You are expected to know that the questions, most of the questions are actually identical from the HL Doppelgänger. So for the level of difficulty, you should level up. Okay, all right. So now let's actually get into the real questions and talk about why topic 4, to me, I think it was quite challenging for both HL and SS students. Okay. All right. Let's talk about why those questions actually, I believe, are difficult in terms of the modeling, right? Because so far, before 2021, if you are working with the topic 4 problems, especially the probability or distribution, they tell you exactly what diagram, for example, you need to use. They will often ask you to use the Venn diagram or tree diagram, but that's been lifted off, right? So when you see this probability problem from 2023 May, I want you to pause the video and read it through. What, for example, okay, diagram would you like to use, right? I want you to think on your own, actually, right? It's very important that we try to think before attempting the problem. And you're right, for this one, what you actually had to do was to work with the tree diagram. But it doesn't tell you to use tree diagram. We had to read it off, right? So without replacement problems, it's going to be independent events. Sorry, it's going to be dependent events. And because it's a compound events, it's better to work with the tree diagram, right? It's whether it's a green or what's the another color? Green or red, right? It goes green, red, etc., etc. And then for the probability of, for example, probability of green, it's gonna be 10 over n times 9 over n minus 1, etc., etc. Because we subtract by 1, right? So that's the difficult part, that it doesn't tell you what diagram you had to use. And another thing that I think it's quite difficult is that all the questions are worthy, right? These are worthy problems. And from worthy problems, what you have to do is to actually make them into a probability modeling, right? So you have to know whether I'm going to use the conditional probability, whether I'm going to use the intersection, whether I'm going to use the union, or am I going to use the exclusion principle, right? Because, for example, when I see the question like part D, as soon as I see the at least one, I know it's going to be very much like the exclusion principle, where it's going to be, if it's at least one green, I'm going to subtract from, what is it? Probability of all red, or one of the first is great. So I want to get the, what is it? All red, or I need to get at least yeah, that's how I'm gonna go, right? So as you can see, it's better to work with the exclusion the exclusion principle for this one. They don't tell you that, right? So we have to translate those wordy sentences into the equation, and that's actually quite hard because it requires deduction. And even for HL students, when they read this question, I'm sure that they're gonna find it very difficult. So for the ISO students, you should really put focus on the topic 4. Let's move on to the next problem. So for this one, so another lovely problem, I think, because so for the time, I'm given the normal distribution, so I know you can work with the CDF, no problem, right? And then for part B, yeah, I think that's very lovely problem. So it doesn't tell you that it's about the independent event, but it's actually talking about the independent events, right? Whatever the probability that you found P, find the probability that the fourth employee is the only one going to the groups who works more than 40 hours a week. So that means for the first 3 events, I need to have the not the event that I've got it from the previous part, and then you multiply the fourth event to be P, because something with the independent events. Actually, this question is super important because every sub question covers the different parts of the probability. And then if you go for the part C, it says now a large group of employee works more than 40 hours per week. Employees selected at random from this large group, find the probability that the employee group is less than 55. So if you actually read the C1, what part of the probability do you think the question is asking about? In fact, it is actually covering with the conditional probability, because we're talking about the probability of the employee less than 55 given that it worked more than 40 hours, you see? So here it did not use the word given that, but you actually had to realize that it's something with the conditional probability because it's giving you the condition, and that's a very difficult pick up. So for the second one is a conditional probability. And then let's have a look at the second one. Let's see if you can actually read it off, right? For the second part, 10 employees are chosen. Now I'm talking about exactly 5 of them. So now you see it's not continuous random variable because it's not talking about the time anymore. It's talking about the number of people. And yes, as you know, right? Now this talks about the binomial distribution. The second part doesn't tell you that it's distributed binomially, but from the fact that it's a fixed number of trials of the 10 people, and then we are using the probability from the previous part, right? From this large group who works less than 55 hours is actually the answer from the C1, and that's going to be my proportion that I'm going to use for the binomial. It's going to be PDF, and it doesn't tell you that. The question doesn't tell you to use binomial, and that's the big difference from the previous exam papers versus this one. It does not give you the hints. You need to be able to derive it, and it's actually quite difficult to do. Even HS students would actually find it very difficult. For part D, another normal distribution problem, I think, and for this one, it's probably the best if you can actually sketch and use the symmetry out of it. And it's a very, very lovely problem because using symmetry with the normal distribution is actually a challenging question, even for the HS students. I'm just pointing out, if you're SL students, that you actually have to actively prepare for the topic 4. So make sure you're trying to, go over many. Oh, this is also a lovely problem because you never might have seen actually the working with the equal distribution, right? It says the same as the distribution from the sum of the obtainment. Yes, I'm not going to delve into too much details because that's not the purpose of this video, but I'm just showing you that topic 4 has been actually quite difficult, challenging problem for throughout the SL exam paper. Okay, so because it's mostly unseen, and it doesn't give you which distribution you got to use or which probability law you have to use. You actually translate, and for me, to a certain extent, that's sort of the aspect required from the AI students. You see, but it's a vice versa role actually for the AI students as well. There's some challenging questions on the AI are actually the question that involve a lot of algebra. It's 100% calculator-based questions, 100% calculator-based questions. However, they're sometimes ask you to find the exact value, or using the algebra would actually be more efficient method for solving such a problem. It's just vice versa. There's always a role of the AI in AA questions as well as the AA questions on the role of the AI. It's mutual, right? So those are the problems that are actually, I think, more challenging because you're not used to it, right? And yes, for this one, I just wanted to point out for A and B, I think it's similar to what we have done. So CDF, and then as you can see, now I'm not talking about the weight, I'm talking about the number of them. So from that, instantly, even though the question doesn't tell you that it's binomially distributed, you know this is a discrete random variable. Only thing that we can do with the discrete random variable as an SS student or AA student, it is actually something with the binomial. But for part C, it doesn't tell you. I want you to read it carefully. For part C, it doesn't tell you to use a tree diagram. But for this one, you actually have to use a tree diagram. Realizing that requires a lot of practice, especially under time pressure, especially under the exam environment. It's very hard to come up with unless you prepare well. This is actually something with the tree diagram. And as you can see, it's multifaceted problem, especially from the topic 4, are quite challenging because you're not used to it. All the algebra questions, all the differentiation, all the integration, all the binomial expansion, all the trigonometric, you already have seen many, many times. And topic 4 often are regarded lacking time to cover at school. So these are the actual challenging ones. But we do know for sure that most of the SL paper have been actually focusing a lot on the topic 4. So you should really, really try to focus, revise on, particularly for topic 4 as an SL student, right? Yeah, that's just one of the last thing that I wanted to mention today. Okay, so the title was a doppelganger. Why have I said that? Because it is exact replicate of many questions from the HR, the word by word. So as an SS student, you're expected to know the same gravity of the topics when you cover the core topics. That's number 1. And number 2, particular emphasis, particular focus, please, my friend, on the topic 4, okay, is my word of advice after having seen enough samples of the exam questions since 2021, okay? But yeah, that's pretty much it for me today. Hopefully next time I can bring you more tips, okay? See you next time.